Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome. We'd like to get going. You're not hearing it well? It's on. Okay, we'll use this one. That's fine. Thank you all so much for being here. Sorry to be a few minutes late getting started. Lots of technical excitement going on in this show today. So anyway, my name is John Humphrey on behalf of the Plymouth Church Sunday Forum Committee. It's my pleasure, my honor to welcome you here for our event this morning. Still louder. Okay, I'll get right on top of it. Okay, so future speakers, take note. You want to be right on top of the mic. Okay, so let's see. I guess the only thing I really need to say at this point is welcome. We have a wonderful program for you this morning. People who went on the Arizona trip will be sharing some of their experiences with you. I think you'll find it a heartfelt morning, and hopefully you will be able to take some of that home with you, take some of that away with you. And with that, I don't think I need to say any more. We've got 5 presenters this morning. Each will take about 7 minutes, and that should give us about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So please hold your questions until then. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Joan Deming to open us with a short prayer. And with that, we'll get going. Thank you again so much for being here.
Not 7 minutes. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for being with us here this morning, as we know you are with your children everywhere. Open our hearts and our minds, especially to remember those at the border this day, those who have struggled through it in the past, and those who are trying to get to it in the future. We pray for those who seek safety in a new place. We pray for those who try to help them find that safety. We ask you now to bless our sharing, that our stories might become real, and that we remember these folks in life and in care and in all our hopes and prayers. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Siska, and I'm not going to speak for 7 minutes either. But first of all, thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to sharing some of our experiences with you. The border trip is one of the ministries from Plymouth's Immigrant Welcoming Working Group. Our purpose statement of the group is to live out our faith by caring for those forced into migration. And so that is what this trip is all about. We invite you anytime you want to join us in our work to help those forced into migration. A little more about the border trip. In 2019, our wonderful Plymouth sister, Ann Manning, and I went to the border and worked in a shelter in Tucson and made some contacts. In 2020, we took a group of about 25 Plymouth people to learn more about the border and to work in one shelter. And at that time, there was very little activity on the US side of the border because of the policies of our president at that time. So our next group just got back. We had lots of activity on the US side of the border, and we now have the privilege to hear from participants from both 2020 and 2022.
Does this one work? No. Well, this one works. So I'm Tom Lefevre, and my wife Jean and I are just going to talk a little bit about our 2020 experience. Louder? I'm sorry. This is a serious thing, this mic is, isn't it? Well, I've always liked the quote by Maya Angelou that says, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I would say that I returned from our trip to the Arizona-Mexico border in 2020 with a basket full of feelings. Some were very pleasant and some are very troubling. The feelings are more vivid than the memories for me. And I'd like to touch upon some of these feelings and make some comment, just general impressions for about 2 minutes or 3, and then Jean will step up and talk more specifically about some time in the desert. At the Good Shepherd United Church of Christ in Sahuarita, we met members of the Green Valley Sahuarita Samaritans. They are a group of over 700 people whose mission is to provide humanitarian assistance to migrants crossing the border through the desert. They organize search teams who drive through the desert on back roads, and they hike the trails in the desert, and they offer water and food and first aid to anyone suffering from heat stroke, dehydration, exhaustion, and injuries. They leave jugs of water on known migrant trails and filtration straws that can be used to drink contaminated water. And unfortunately, they find bodies. Over 3,000 migrants have died in the Arizona desert since the year 2000. They also do advocacy and immigration courtroom witnessing. To me, they were inspiring. I felt great admiration for what they were doing. On the Mexican side of the border, we met with a young Mexican father who was in a crude tarp tent at the border wall with his young wife and baby, awaiting the call from the border agents that their number had come up to formally apply for asylum. They had fled the kidnapping, extortion, and murder of the cartels. Their anxiety was palpable. Their fear was palpable. And I felt anxiety with them and for them. I think we all did. And much later, we learned that their asylum request was granted a hearing. They have a chance for asylum, probably still a small chance. But I felt exhilaration at that point. Maybe they'll make it. I felt some hope. During the trip, I felt guilty about having the privilege to go back and forth across the border by basically just waving my passport, while around us there were hundreds of people who were desperate to cross, but did not have that option. I felt sadness about the whole confused, complicated, cruel, shameful mess that the border situation is. The Remain in Mexico policy has created a ballooning of dangerous refugee camp living in a country that cannot afford to manage it. I felt exasperation that our country has been unable to make this work better. There seems to be so little compassion to be found from our government. And so I came back with my basket full of all these feelings, but also I came back feeling motivated. So turn it over to Jean.
Is this mic, can you hear me?
No?
Now can you hear me? Okay. I'm glad you're all here. Our trip to the border into really close. Our trip to the border in 2020 was multifaceted. It had so many emotions with it. I can't even begin to tell you all the reactions that we had. Tom talked about some of those feelings, but it's impossible to put all those in a 3-minute talk because we split our 7 minutes. For a tiny snapshot of our time, if we could put the desert scene up, please. Just the, that one. Nope, not that one. There we go. Thanks. For a tiny snapshot of our time, I was asked to talk about the experience of walking through the desert. We did many things on this trip, but I'm just going to talk about our time in the desert. We were walking about, we were asked to go, not asked, but we wanted to go into the desert to find out what it was like for the migrants to be there. What they had to deal with in trying to gain their freedom. We were in the desert on a sunny, pleasant day, no scorching sun, no freezing nights, no mind-numbing fear. It was daylight and we could see our footing. We could see, because it was very rocky, and we could see and be mindful of the very sharp cactus barbs. Even at that, we got cut and scratched, some of us did. The migrants didn't have that luxury that I just mentioned. They had to travel by night, running, carrying what little things that they had. And I, again, cannot imagine the immense fear of being caught. This first picture isn't a good photo, I know that, but I took it anyway because I wanted you to see the density of the desert in parts, not all of it, but in parts. So they're running in between and trying to get away, and speed was important. They had to move by night. It posed such a navigational hazard, especially in the dark. Then we came across the crosses. Can we have the cross picture? There we go. The crudely constructed crosses where someone lost their life, right there on that very spot. Someone could go no further, not another step. It was haunting and desperately sad. The cross was merely marked unknown 2009. His or her family back home would never know what really happened to them. Hope for better life ended right there. We all gathered around with Pastor Randy, who was leading our walk, and he would read a poem, or we'd sing a prayer, we'd sing a song. But before we would leave and walk to the next cross, we'd say, presente, present, we're with you. We honor you. It's all we could do. Along the way, when we were walking, we'd see abandoned items left in haste or left in utter exhaustion. A backpack, a shirt, a shoe, toothpaste. It was a somber and sobering walk through the desert. It's where all hope died for more than those 3,000 people since 2000, the year 2000 in Arizona alone, as Tom mentioned. And once we returned to the church where our hike began, we saw this beautiful handmade quilt. They found, and onto that quilt were stitched items that they found in the desert. Items from someone's life. Notice the child's shoe, a baby's sock, a toothbrush, rosary, a cherished piece of cloth. And down at the bottom, you can see two little children. Somebody carried their precious children along with them that way, all left behind. You can't see it on this picture, but in the church below that picture, a picture of the quilt, is a small frame with words that held a challenge to all of us. Lord, when did we see you hungry? When were you thirsty and we gave you drink? We all know those words from Matthew 25. And Jesus answered to them, truly I say to you, as you did it to the least of these, you did it unto me.
I may be the first one that you asked to speak quieter, but I'll do my best. I'm Cynthia Smith. I've been a member of Plymouth for a while, and I want to share a couple things. Some of what I was going to share has already been greatly shared, but I wanted to first talk about the group and how we got together. I signed up for this trip several months ago, and not long after that, my lover of almost 30 years passed away unexpectedly. And so I wasn't going to go. I didn't know anybody. I had signed up for this trip because I wanted to get to know more Plymouth members. And a good friend of mine came over a couple of days after she had passed away. And I was telling her I was not going to go on this trip now. And she said, well, what if I go with you? And I said, oh, you can't go. You have to be a member of Plymouth. And she said, well, why don't we let them tell me that? I said, okay. So, of course, you can imagine what the answer was. So Nancy, my friend, came along with me, and I went with quite an attitude. And one was that I understood the border crisis pretty well because I read the newspaper. And that I went down with a lot of other attitudes, like I've not been in Arizona since we took a family trip in 1970, and I was going to be a sophomore in high school. So of course I was very knowledgeable. And I was, what I want to share about this group and what we experienced is I also went down with the attitude that the Biden administration, and in particular, Vice President Harris, was going to have made incredible improvements on the situation. And I learned incredible things. And what I wanted to talk about was a little bit more about the volunteers and the people down there, part of the Samaritan group. They were people that I went down with an attitude that everybody who's down there in Tucson are snowbirds, and they decide every morning whether they want to golf or play pickleball. And I know I'm lucky I was allowed to go along on this trip. And that first Sunday service was incredible with the people there. But Monday morning, when we went to the Samaritans gathering, I was just finally speechless. I was so impressed with what people who I never would have thought of as looking at what they were doing, the bravery, the commitment, the effort, and they were going into places that were dangerous, that were unsafe, and they were making a difference. And yes, they were all old too. Yeah, probably at least older than me. But it was really, and I've been kind of silly, but I do want to, they impressed me. I had lunch with one woman when we had crossed the border and at one of the shelters, and she and her husband, he had been an engineer. They, I think, came from somewhere in the Northwest, and they had retired in Green Valley, and she had gotten involved through the church, and she was very involved. And I could tell as she was talking to different people that her Spanish was really good. And she said, well, I've wanted to pick this up. And she said, so I'm going on a trip soon down to Guatemala for a 2-week immersion into the Spanish speaking. This is not someone that I would have, by looking at her, thinking would have been that. And, I can say Spanish rice, and that's about the limit of my Spanish speaking. So it moved me incredibly when we went on the vigil, and I see the people that every Tuesday night are there to acknowledge and note the people we have lost. It moved me deeply that we all can make a difference. And the group also of people that I was on that trip with have made an incredible difference already to me in my life. And I thank you all.
Okay, I'm Jean Tracy, and I was fortunate to join the group this year. It was just truly life altering for me. I'm going to talk about 3 of the shelters that we visited, all on the Mexico side of the border. The first was that's not the first one, but it doesn't really matter. The first place we visited was the House of Mercy for All Nations in Nogales, right across the border from Nogales, Arizona. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the Spanish version because I will massacre it. But anyway, this is where migrants wait to cross the border. They have a capacity of 180 people, and there were 120 there when we visited. They usually stay anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months. It's in a beautiful setting in Nogales, kind of up on a hill. Those who were in the vans can appreciate the hill. And I'm looking back here at Beth, and I hear stories from the 2020 trip and riding the van up these steep hills. In any case, it's like a village. It's surrounded by a tall fence. All the fences have barbed wire on them, which is distressing. There were children playing. It was a gorgeous day. Children running around. Adults were either working on their chores or chatting. Each of the adults takes a part in keeping the village running, whether it be cooking, cleaning, building things. They have a labyrinth that they had created. It's very important for people to have the opportunity to ponder, to meditate, to gain strength in whatever way they can. And the labyrinth is helpful for many. We looked at their dorm-like housing. There's housing, an area for men, one for women, and one for families. And as you peeked in, you could see the beds just very, very closely, kind of like a dorm sort of a setting. We observed a couple of fellows from HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, and they were talking to a group about this size of migrants, telling them about the process for getting across the border. And then we were fortunate towards the end for a group of migrants joined us in a circle, pulled up their chairs, and through our translator, Dell, told us a bit about their journey. They did not talk very specifically about the troubles they faced, but it was clear it was very distressing, but their faith just shone through. They just have such commitment to doing this and try again. Then the next place, so this is Agua Prieta, and you can see this woman, it's a long time, I believe she's a volunteer, and she's been there for years, and we intentionally did not take pictures of the migrants themselves, but you can see the migrants, they're rolling bread dough and they put meat in the middle, and they have a large open fire. They were cooking the bread. So that's part of the work that they do. Next, we went to the migrant aid station the next day, and that was in Agua Prieta. And that's the slide with the couple of shoes. Yes. So this was a very chilly day. We were all huddled in our coats, and those of us who had gloves and hats were wearing those. It was a drizzly day, again, cold. And I mentioned that specifically because in this shelter, it's described to us like their emergency room. It's like an ER. People come there for a very short period of time. And in this small room, there was 4 migrants huddled over in the corner. And here we were shivering in our jackets, and they were wearing what's described to us as paper clothes. It's what ICE or the Border Patrol give them. And I can only imagine how chilly they were. I noticed 2 of the women were wearing socks with flip-flops. So certainly not clothing that you would choose to wear for a journey of the sort they were on. The 4 migrants we were told through a translator, were all from Guatemala, young people, a couple and 2 women. Several of them, we were told, had been turned back 3 or 4 times. They said they had been held in cages with open toilets, no walls, very demeaning. And at this place, there are apparently beds upstairs, and they can rest for a while before they continue on their journey. And if they're really ill, the Red Cross has facilities there. One thing that just so touched my heart is the person who was working there, a nun, a sister, was cutting up pieces of cake for these 4 migrants. And it was a Valentine's cake. And they were eating this cake and drinking maybe a hot drink of some sort in mugs. And this nun told us that she listens a lot. She said, listening heals the heart. Dell, our guide, many of you know her, said she hadn't noticed the locks on the doors like there were this time when we visited. So security is even more and more of a concern. We were fortunate to be able to give the young couple $80 to help with their bus fare back to Guatemala, and gave each of the women $50 to help them on their journey. Next, so this was the outside of the migrant aid station. Then this is CAME, which stands for the Center for Attention with Migrants in Exodus, also in Agua Prieta. That was the same day. And here the migrants can rest. They're waiting for their asylum interviews. They used to try to get across the border. They used to do the asylum interviews in Agua Prieta as well, but now they have to go to Nogales. And it's a convoluted, dysfunctional process. It's just, for example, you have to have a phone. Many of them don't have phones, or they have flip phones that don't have connectivity. And it takes, you have 5 minutes before the queue is full, and it takes an hour to download your photo. And if you are able to get into the line, you might be separated from your children and others you're traveling with. At CAME, they can accommodate 80 to 100 people. When we were there were 24 people from Mexico and Guatemala. They stay an average of 3 to 7 days. Some have been expelled from the United States as many as 10 times, and they continue to try. This place as well, you can't really see it here, but it was surrounded by a tall fence, topped with razor wire. We were fortunate that 2 of the migrants agreed to talk to us, again through a translator. They were both young Guatemalan men. The first was Alex. His 5 siblings live in the United States with his mother. He is left behind, and he continues to try. He's been beaten. He's been extorted of money many, many times, but he says he's going to try again. Julio, the other young man, has a wife and 3 young children in Guatemala. Their home had been burned down by the cartel, and his wife and children are living separately in Guatemala to try to remain safe from the cartel. Julio, as he told us his story, just tears were running down his cheeks. So quickly, the things that struck me the most in each place, and you'll hear themes from the others, I'm sure, just is the tenacity and the faith of these migrants. They just continue to try. They're so brave. We asked numerous times, what would you like us to know? And we heard the response, we're not bad people. We're not bad people. The tough application process, it is so broken. I was touched by the huge hearts of those who have dedicated their lives to raising the dignity of these migrants. I was struck by the fear and the barbed wire and the locks. And I was struck by the bright art. This is an example that was just everywhere, much of it painted by the migrants themselves to tell their journey.
I'm Don Schultz, a rather new resident of Minneapolis and member of this Plymouth community, and I'm grateful for both of those, although I'm a Wisconsin Badger at heart. I used to feel accepted here. So some gopher want to read this? Every Tuesday at 5 p.m. since December 2000, there's been a Healing Our Borders vigil in Douglas, Arizona, near the border, crossing into Mexico. Our border immersion group joined this vigil on Tuesday, February 21st. And during the 20 plus years, this vigil has varied in size from 1 to more than 60. We were among approximately 30 plus people who gathered that afternoon and showed up to remember those who died and whose bodies were found as they tried to cross from Mexico into safety in the United States through the Cochise County, Arizona desert. This weekly vigil happens, as I can sense, primarily because of one man. His name is John Knox. He's the keeper of the ritual and the keeper of the crosses and the guide for all who join him. As Joan and I approached the group that was assembling for the vigil, we had no idea what to expect. And as was common for us during this immersion experience, uneasiness accompanied the unknown. The time together began with Jack sharing the history of the vigil, providing guidance for how to participate, and a prayer. We were told we would each carry a cross. You can see each person carrying that cross. That cross would include the name and a birth date when one or both were known, and the date the migrant's body was found in the desert. We were to take that cross, carry it, and when our time came to step into the street, face the oncoming traffic, say the person's name, and set the cross on the curb. This ritual was repeated until we got to the point at the end of the vigil near the border. I got the message rather soon that doing this properly and reverently was important. However, after hearing the instructions, both Joan and I relied upon watching what others did to guide us. We were handed a cross and we walked with it on the sidewalk next to the street to the border crossing. When our time came, we stepped into the street, faced the cars waiting to cross the border, called out the name of the person, and everyone responded, "Presente." We then placed our cross on the curb for all to see, took another cross, the ritual and the witness continued. Presente, by this point in our immersion experience, was a familiar exclamation. On Sunday, as you heard, we shouted it in places where the migrant bodies were found in the desert in another county. Presente proclaims, you are still present. You are not forgotten. We say their names. This was all taking place in the sidewalk next to and into the street leading to the border crossing into Mexico. And it was after 5 o'clock in the evening. As the vigil proceeds, more and more cars join the slow, or often not moving at all, line to the border checkpoint. As obviously was part of the plan, the occupants of the car cannot, no matter how hard they try, ignore what's happening. I could only speculate what they were thinking, feeling, and how it affected them. I found myself wondering, what are their stories? Where have they been during the day? What have they been doing? How early in the morning did they get up? When will they get home? Do they make this crossing every day? And why does it have to be so difficult to cross the border? The vigil culminates on a patch of grass that provides a space for the group to form kind of a circle. In the center are 3 crosses that are placed on the ground. Words are spoken about the crosses and who and what they represent. And the vigil closes with a song and prayer. On the way back to where we began, we pick up the crosses so they are ready for the people who will gather next week for the vigil. And Jack is the caretaker. Joan and I regularly watch Henry Louis Gates' PBS program, Finding Your Roots. We find it fascinating. Last Tuesday's episode featured Grant Van Jones. After he discovered his roots, he made the following comment: you die twice. You die the first time when your body dies. And then you die a second time, the last time someone says your name. And then you die the second time, the last time someone says your name. And he says, I'm going to be sure these people stay alive. In Douglas, Arizona, every Tuesday, The names of these siblings of ours who have died on their journey through the desert are said out loud. We say their names one more time, and they are presente.
My name is Karen Cannon. I'm gonna wrap it up here. I had the privilege of going on both trips. There were 3 of us that chose to go back a second time: John Humphrey, Judy Takinen, and myself. And as Nancy mentioned, as Nancy mentioned, when we went down in 2020, the opportunity to volunteer was really non-existent because there was nobody at the shelter where we were. Trump had effectively closed the border with his Remain in Mexico policy. So 3 of us decided to go along on the second trip only to volunteer at Casa Alitas. You've heard a lot about the immersion experience, and the people on the second trip will also spend a day with us at Casa Alitas. Casa Alitas Welcome Center is one of the I'll explain that later. One of the programs of the Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona. And it's a large former juvenile detention center, actually, that they've converted into this very warm, welcoming place for migrants who have been released by ICE and or the Border Patrol. In the past, probably a decade ago, ICE and the Border Patrol would simply leave people off on street corners in Tucson or other cities in Southern Arizona, sometimes in the middle of the night, with nothing. And Catholic Services had taken upon themselves to go round these people up and try to find a way to care for them. It's grown now into this massive shelter where people are welcomed. They're brought now by bus from Nogales or other points of entry by put on there by the Border Patrol. They work very closely with Border Patrol, and they are then dumped at this welcome center. The welcome center then provides basic humanitarian aid and kind of first triage for the people coming over from the border. And this opportunity to volunteer there gave us some hope. These are the people who actually made it through, the 1% who made it through that complicated process you've heard described to get into our country. And maybe 1% of them eventually will be granted asylum. So it's still a very tiny glimmer of hope. But it was for those of us who got to spend the week there, it was, I think, a very uplifting experience. What happens at the Welcome Center, they come in, bus loads of people. We processed maybe up to 300 people a day. It was just massive numbers coming in, mainly families, but also individuals, men and women sometimes. They are given a COVID test. They are then taken to a station where they're interviewed, try to figure out where they want to go. Most of them have family or some connection to the United States, a sponsor, somebody who will take them in. So they have to figure out how to get there, whether it's Minnesota or New York, California, Florida. They go all over the place. They're given medical assistance as needed. And then they're taken to various stations where they're given the kind of basic necessities. And that was the job that John and Judy and I had. This was our domain, this lovely storeroom. It doesn't look like much, but in there, we put together every day these blue bags you can see in the corner there. And in blue bags were underwear for men or women. We had different bags, 3 different sizes for men and women. Toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, comb, kind of just the basic stuff like that. And we had to pack the bags, have them all ready to go because the people would be coming up in big lines and we'd be handing out these bags. So the people would come, you'd kind of size them up. Is this a big guy or a little guy? Then you have to ask them in Spanish, lots of sign language since none of us really spoke Spanish. How many children do you have? Are you family of 5, and then you'd put together these bags for the family. And I should describe how many of them came in. Remember the paper clothes that Jean mentioned? Many of them were wearing, it looked like the scrubs in hospitals, except not as nice quality. They were literally like paper. Some of them had flip-flops, just nothing. Others had more normal clothes, but they all were in desperate need of new clothes. So after we handed them the bag, most of them were then taken to this glorious place, which was our clothes closet. And a lot of volunteers spend their time, it's all donated clothes. They spend their time sorting clothes, putting them on racks for different sizes, and then helping the clients get one outfit. So everybody can get one pair of pants, one shirt. In great demand were the coats, and we ran out of coats. It was actually quite chilly down there in Arizona, and so we'd ask people if they were going to New York or Massachusetts or someplace north. We would try to get them a warm jacket or coat. Also, back in our storeroom, we had hats, gloves, that kind of thing. So, and then of course, food was provided, and then the people were either directly taken to the airport or a bus, or if they had to spend a night or two, taken to a shelter where they could spend the night. A few people did stay at Casalitas. They had some room for them. I just want to share now with you 2 stories from our time there. There were lots and lots of children running around, and Judy and John and I just were amazed at how well behaved most of these children were. But in one case, a little girl was having a 2-year-old meltdown. She was just in tears, sobbing. And we saw a boy, maybe about big. Every child was given a little toy animal. For some reason, she didn't have a stuffed animal. He came over and she just brightened up, and it was like the mother had been able to do nothing with her. She was all of a sudden got this toy animal from the boy, and she was fine. And that was the kind of thing we experienced, people helping each other. It was amazing. Final story, when John Humphrey and I went to the airport, I noticed, back to that other slide, those blue bags, I noticed 2 guys carrying those blue bags. They were very noticeable because they said, let's have fun or something on there. They obviously donated bags. And they were waiting at the gate with me, and they looked very confused. So I went over and asked them if they came from Casalitas, and they said yes. They showed me their boarding passes, and they were going through Minneapolis. And I said, well, that's just great. I'm going to Minneapolis too. So you just follow me. You get on the plane when I do, because they kept on looking, didn't know when they should get on. We got on the plane, we got to Minneapolis, and then I wanted to see where they were going next. They didn't have a seat. They were going to Newark. They didn't have a seat on the next plane. And so John Humphrey, who speaks some Spanish, was able to help them get to their gate, work with the gate agent. They did get on the plane because this was late at night, and they would not have gotten a second flight out. So if you ever are at the airport and you see somebody carrying those blue bags, so, and anyway, it was an amazing experience. I would recommend, if anybody wants to have a true volunteer experience, to go for at least a week, because you can, that's kind of what it takes to learn the ropes and be able to assist these people. But it was a truly amazing experience. Thank you for your time. And now I think we maybe have 3 minutes for questions, John.
Oh, at least.
Okay.
Okay. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll get the microphone to you, so that if we have any remote audience, they'll be able to hear your question as well. So, any questions? Okay.
I'd like to ask, what are we doing in terms of communicating with our policymakers about what is really going on down there, particularly our congressional representatives?
Oh. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to take an advantage of that question. One of the things you can do now here in Minnesota is that there is a bill in front of the legislature, both houses of the legislature, that's related to this. It's the North Star Act. STAR stands for Safety, Trust, and Respect. This is a bill that would prohibit state and local law enforcement from cooperating with civil federal immigration enforcement. So right now, people are already here, but the police will stop someone and ask them to prove that they are here in this country with papers. They don't have papers with them, don't have to put this in place. Even people who have papers are often handed over to ICE for a small, very small traffic violation, that sort of thing, and end up being deported. Or held by ICE for several months while their families are left in limbo. They're left in limbo. So this is a bill. All of you who've signed up for the Immigrant Welcoming Working Group have gotten one message urging you to contact your legislators about it. You're going to get another one within the next week. I urge you to take advantage of this. It's not preventing what's happening at the border right now, but it's preventing what could happen at the border in the future. There are going to be more opportunities for this sort of thing as we go forward.
If we are not on the list for the immigrant welcoming, how, to whom do we?
So if you're not on the Immigrant Welcoming Work Group list, please communicate with Nancy Siska and she will make sure that we get your name on that list.
Is there a way to donate clothing or shoes, coats that would get down there, or is it needed here in our state?
Anything if you're interested in doing some.
Thank you so much. Next Sunday,